The devil is in the details in a lot of things in life, and competitive Pokemon is no exception. Games are decided by such razor-thin margins all the time, and thus the little details are really important. Things that are easily overlooked can often significantly affect a game, potentially even the outcome. Now, this is usually in the case of like EVs, for example. Like, if as opposed to just going for max spreads, sometimes you can throw in 40-ish EVs somewhere else and completely change how your Pokemon is able to take on something else. Like, for example, Tangrowth has such a high defense stat. Even if you're running physically max Tangrowth, then at a certain point the difference between like 252 defense EVs and 216 are minimal to non-existent, whereas the difference between 0 and 40 special defense EVs on Tangrowth can be enormous. Taking like HP Ices and even like Scalds or something. So something like that. Or there's an in-game example too. Like sometimes someone will say, "Oh, I just want to play it safe, so I'm going to sacrifice this." And then they realize, oh, well, I didn't have to sacrifice that. And in fact, I would have been much better off if I had, played it a little more aggressively, been a little less overtly safe. So details like that are often, because especially in terms of play, someone will often say after a loss, oh, there was nothing I could have done. And on the surface, it might seem that, yeah, okay, maybe there wasn't much they could have done, like, drastically differently, but there were very likely, almost certainly, a lot of things they could have done, a little differently that would have, any one of them would have made a difference. And then when you consider how many of these little differences will add up over the course of a game, then you're looking at something else entirely. Now, those are important too, but it even comes down to details about the metagame itself, and that is the subject of this video. It's not that Raikou has such an amazing shiny form that using the regular one is a crime, and that's what this video is about. No, I mean, look, I love shiny Pokemon. I cram as many as I can onto the teams I like to use, and because I loved shinies as a kid. They're so rare, so now we get to play on simulators and I get to use them whenever I want. Like, are you serious? So it's not about that, though. Near the end of Generation 4, there was an event for Raikou, Suicune, and Entei where they all got extreme speed. However, the big winner of that was also that Raikou got Aura Sphere, which is... well, also Entei got Flare Blitz there, and Suicune was the loser of that because it got Air Slash. But Raikou got Aura Sphere, which is absolutely huge for its OU prospects. Because Raikou was a good OU Pokemon before, very unique in what it did. But with Aura Sphere, it becomes a whole different beast. It absolutely crushes Tyranitar, just completely flips the tables on its most popular splashable offensive check. It slams through Heatran, which is absolutely enormous, because Heatran is also one of the Pokemon in OU that doesn't immediately collapse to strong electric types. So it's not a great counter, but it tends to be a good check. And with Aura Sphere, forget it. And then, of course, Clefable got popular later after the generation ended. And when that's your special wall, you can't really fend off Raikou with it too well, because Aura Sphere slams it really hard. So it's an amazing move to have on Raikou. Now, Raikou doesn't need it, but it likes having it in its arsenal, for sure. Now, there are two conditions for Raikou to be able to run Aura Sphere. Number one, it needs a rash nature. That's fine. In fact, it's great, considering how much of a fiasco it could have been if it had to go adamant or something. Instead, it can't outrun Gengar and Infernape, and Latias, since that came back later. But that's still fine, because with max speed EVs and a neutral nature, it still outruns plus speed base 100s like Jirachi and Flygon, which is absolutely incredible. That's the golden standard. Sometimes Starmie even runs Modest because that's such a good speed tier anyway, and the extra power is great. And of course, with Raikou, Rash boosted special attack, which makes it hit even harder. So that's fantastic. It doesn't love that Rash cuts into its special defense, but, you know, it doesn't tend to make an enormous difference, and regardless, it's still a very worthwhile price to pay. Now, the Rash nature is only part of what allows it to run Aura Sphere, and Extreme Speed, for that matter. It also needs to be shiny, right? And you think, okay, cool, so when I run Aura Sphere Raikou, I make it shiny. Duh. Yeah, okay, but that means as soon as you run a non-shiny Raikou, like the one on the screen right now, you are telling your opponent, I don't have Aura Sphere. And if you want to see how significant that can be, look at this Tyranitar, which just happily waltzes into it and knows it's going to beat it, because it knows it doesn't have Aura Sphere. It's that simple. So it is optimal to always run shiny Raikou, even if you don't have Aura Sphere. Even if you're using Protect Calm Mind or Sub Calm Mind or whatever, you should not be letting your opponent know that you don't have Aura Sphere. I'll give another example. Because you could make the argument, if you were being a stickler about this game, well, Bluewin's team clearly called for, you know, a Calm Mind sweeper late game, and that struggles to fit Aura Sphere into its arsenal. To that, I would say, okay, number one, that team would really like a Calm Mind Aura Sphere Raikou, because that would help it break through stallier teams, which the rest might struggle with. In fact, very likely would struggle with. So it would love to have Aura Sphere to help bust through Clefable in particular. As well as having more immediate damage against something like a Mixed Tar, which would also be a pain. Or even just to help assuage Lava Plume Heatran being a pain. There's a lot of reasons why you could run Calm Mind Aura Sphere Raikou there, because it's still going to be a great fast late game sweeper, you know. Protect and Sub and stuff are nice, but you know, this is a team with a lot of bulk to it. You don't need Protect as much as you might on a frailer T-Spike's offense team. So there's a lot of reasons why it could be Aura Sphere number one. And number two, yes, but don't forget that this is just an example. And the overall idea is, why should you let your, you know, even if in this game it wasn't, I mean, okay, first of all, if Night Fox decided, hey, that thing might have Aura Sphere, I might have to, you know, make some different moves, then maybe Bluewin gets back into the game a little bit, maybe. But point being, why should you let your opponent know for certain that there's no Aura Sphere? So I'll give you another example. We're going to skip ahead to because the Raikou doesn't come out until the end of this one. Stuff happens. This was back when we were allowed to use Shiny Jirachi, by the way. We're not allowed to use Shiny Jirachi or Celebi anymore because it's like part of an event or something, which is a shame. So I guess this video is also a PSA to not do that. So, yeah. Anyway, so now the Raikou's going to come out, and, you know, this game is not really important. Now, this Raikou, this is a team of mine, so I know that this Raikou was Calm Mind Protect, but it's still shiny because there's no reason to let the opponent know that there's no Aura Sphere. I realize I keep saying it over and over, but it is that important because you do have to burn it into your brain. Because otherwise, this is not the only instance of shiny versus no shiny. So, you know, why should this not have... You know, like, okay, if this game had gone a little differently, then the Raikou being shiny might make Philip think, oh, well, that might be a Rash Raikou, so my Infernape would outspeed it, and I'm going to stay in, and this Raikou is timid, so it winds up KOing Infernape. So even something like that, which has nothing to do with the coverage of Aura Sphere itself, but just the Rash nature, might change the game if it had gone a different way, you know? So stuff like that. Or, of course, I mean, another example of, hey, you know, this T-Tar knows it can switch into non-shiny Raikou, whereas with shiny, it's going to think, oh man, I'm going to have to pivot around this with Rotom or Heracross or something. So, yeah, that's yet another example. And here is Lead Raikou, which is also a great set. And this, you know, if you lead off with Raikou, then it should always be shiny because you might want your opponent to think you have E-Speed, which is rarer now, but, you know, very possible. So, in a similar vein that actually has any sort of competitive merit, then you would not want to run shiny Zapdos ever in advance. This is the only other serious example I can think of. Because you don't because not shiny Zapdos cannot run Baton Pass, and Baton Pass is a move that you don't need to run on Zapdos in advance, but there's no reason to tell your opponent I do not have Baton Pass. There's no reason to give them that free information. And I guess if you're using Entei with Flare Blitz, like in Gen 5 RU or Gen 4 UU, where it's great, then that also or sorry, no, if you're using Entei without Flare Blitz and E-Speed, like a sub Calm Mind Protect set, it should still be shiny, because there's no reason to tell your opponent, I am, not a set with Flare Blitz. I am a special attacker, because that just makes it... Even when your team composition makes it the most obvious thing in the world that your Raikou is Calm Mind Protect, or that your Zapdos is not Baton Pass in Gen 3, or that your Entei is sub Calm Mind Protect as opposed to Choice Band, even then, there's just no reason to not be optimal like this. Unless, I guess, you think it's so obvious, and you also just love the non-shiny forms of Raikou and Entei that much, but even then, you're going to wind up regretting it, especially with the Raikou case. I don't think it'd make as much of a difference for Entei, but... or, if you really love shiny Zapdos in advance, and you're thinking, yeah, there's no way they're going to think there's Baton Pass on this thing. So, yeah, that was my little YouTube short, so thank you for watching, and I will catch you in the next one. And remember, keep your Raikous shiny.